Next, we will hear from Jerel Bartig, who, as she mentioned, has a joint appointment between the Forest Service and NRCS, and she'll tell us about the Ohio Interagency Forestry Team. And I was really excited about learning about this team when Jerel and I met to talk about something else, actually, a couple months ago, because this team was inspired by the Joint Forestry Team.
Thanks, Susan. Mike's going to help me with my slides because I don't have stable internet connection for sure by the end of the day.
Great, and thanks, Mike.
And yes, I really appreciate it, Mike. Or you'd be seeing a lot of frozen slides. So I put 10 slides together to speak to the questions that Susan asked us to address. And I got to thank everybody who showed the longleaf pine backdrops. I grew up in Alabama. It was nice for me to see that. I've now got a oak woodland behind me on the Wayne National Forest. So we'll start with the first slide. And this to give a little background on the origin and history of the forestry team in Ohio. We're really based on a very long-term partnership between the Ohio Division of Forestry and NRCS. And actually, James is going to be writing, as we speak, a publication piece on this. So be looking for that soon. That'll tell a little bit more about this going on 2-decade-long partnership. Then the next point of inspiration. So our state conservationist is Terry Cosby. So he's been here all this time to help both of that long-term partnership. And then he was involved in establishing the National Joint Forestry Team. And so I credit him with saying, well, why aren't we doing that in Ohio? And so you all were our inspiration. So it's a real honor for me to get to come to one of your meetings and hear from you. So that was definitely what inspired us to try to more formally organize. But like a lot of the things that Kristen and Adam said today, there's a lot of different ways to do this. We're all trying to figure out the best way to take collective action, and there is no one way or right way. So even though we formalized on the Wayne National Forest, NRCS, and the state as a mini joint forestry team, we still, we had a common thread that's been mentioned today. We had an invasive tree called Tree of Heaven that we collectively did an all lands approach to try to come together around. So the common threat sometimes helps with partnerships. We received a 2 Chiefs Partnership Award for doing some of that work, but really it took the Joint Chiefs Restoration Partnership Award to help us catalyze ourselves into better tell the story around oak forest ecosystems. That's where we're working. Those are the issues we're dealing with. And this partnership really catalyzed us into becoming the formal team that we are today. So with the next slide, I'll tell you something about who we are. So why this list? So if you're an agency in Ohio and you have a forest management mission, you are invited to be on the Ohio Interagency Forestry Team. So we're 8 different units of government, 4 units that are federal, all 3 branches of the Forest Service, NRCS, and 4 state entities, the Division of Forestry, of course, Division of Wildlife, and then cooperative extension. So forestry cooperative extension is implemented in Ohio by Ohio State University and Central State University. So figuring out where to draw the line so you can have a manageable team. It's not like we're the only ones that do forest management in Ohio, but we're all agencies with forest management in our mission. And we just call ourselves a team. We're not the collaborative. We don't represent the whole land base. So with the next slide, I'll quick show you where we're working. So most of the partners on this team have a statewide mission, but we're focusing our attention on a 17-county region that has nearly half of the forest resource in the state of Ohio. The only national forest, the Wayne National Forest, is here. Most of the state forests are here. Many wildlife management areas. These are all oak-dominated ecosystems. So that's the suite of issues that we're contending with here. So the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the governance model that we are organizing ourselves under. It's got 6 different elements to it. So the first piece being structure and process. So we have various documents, including a team charter, various agreements, including the interagency agreement that my position works under, all lining up with this element. We're working on coordinated communication and outreach. I think Kristen might have mentioned how important it is. We are alphabet soup. The public sees us all as the same. And when we can't communicate consistently and tell our story together, it's not very helpful. So we're trying to work on that, and yet we're maintaining our distinct identities. We don't have our separate logo. We don't have a separate website. We're delivering our outputs through our normal channels, but we're trying to deliver our messaging in a consistent voice. And so the third element has been really important. We're building a regional science framework, and the Forest Service Northern Research Station has been really key to leading this effort, so that we're consistently using data sets together, terminology is the same, interpretation is the same. We're building a community of practice around some common data tools and science trainings that we do together to build some institutional depth of knowledge. Then the fourth element, familiar to everybody, we're developing landscape scale conservation strategies. We're articulating and documenting these. We're operating, the fifth element is a collaborative leadership. It's a model where we can share the risk together. And the last element is formally using adaptive management grounded in international project management standards, so we can have a transparent, consistent way to manage our work, but yet be flexible. Because as you all know, flexibility is key in doing this kind of work. So the next slide. So just mentioning, we always talk about challenges and opportunities. And I know as humans, we kind of dwell on the challenges, but really this slide might look negative, but I actually see everything on the slide. It's both. It's an opportunity just as much. So staff turnover, I think everybody's dealing with. We actually onboarded 7 out of 8 of our agency leaders. Last year, this past year was the first time they got to work together under this governance model. And so I was, as the coordinator, really watching to see, do my bosses like each other? Is there some chemistry? The charter members, who I consider my 3 supervisors, is the state conservationist, the forest supervisor, and the state forester. And they've got great chemistry in Ohio. And if they didn't, I pretty much couldn't do my job. So the other, I guess, challenge opportunity I would point out is complexity. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but I think it's already been talked about today. Interagency coordination is not an easy thing to do. Fragmented land base. You probably might have noticed on the map that there's not a lot of public land in Ohio. There's not a lot of co-located public land. More than 75% of the land base is an individual private woodland owner. So that's who owns the woods. And then if you look at FIA data, Ohio, unfortunately, is one of the top states in loss of forest land spatial integrity. So there's a lot of complexity around that. And then Ohio is a breadbasket state. And sometimes they forget that forestry is a really important contributor too. And so we always have this big drumbeat of big agriculture to also raise our hands up against. And then that focus area that I showed you, all in Appalachian, Ohio. And it's an underserved and marginalized place that we haven't always delivered government services well to. So the next slide. So I picked 4 different lessons learned today to speak to some of Susan's questions, but I realized in putting these slides together, I probably could be listing lessons learned under each of the 6 elements. I'm going to try to keep up with that, building the plane and flying it while we do all this work. It's hard to document what are we learning, is it getting us where we want to go? But I think one of the most important things I could say is about how intentional we've been at connecting at all levels of the agencies, from forming meaningful relationships from the agency leaders all the way down to boots on the ground. And before we started all this, like prior to our Joint Chiefs project, a lot of agency staff had not met their opposite numbers. And so just the first time we got them in the room with the Joint Chiefs workshop, we had 71 people in the room, and some were meeting for the first time. We right now are in the process of revising our forestry team charter. It was actually written a couple years before the business plan and business case. So a lot of evolution there, but it's really that structure and that intentional coming together on a regular basis to meet has been serving us well. So the next slide. We learned a lot this year about how the different scopes and scales of existing forestry frameworks relate to each other. I think we're all aware of things like the State Forest Action Plan, but this year, because all the states are revising their State Forest Action Plan, at the same time, the Wayne National Forest decided to do an assessment of its existing land management plan. Doing that exercise, the forestry team ended up participating almost in brokering conversations between different agency inputs, sharing data sets, and finding out where these connections actually exist. So I won't go into details on lessons learned, but we ended up giving 2 different presentations on this set of lessons learned. One was shared at the Northeast Midwest State Foresters Alliance Planning Committee this fall, and also a National Forest Foundation shared stewardship webinar, and we are still harvesting these lessons learned. But we are seeing that the forestry team business model and business plan is helping bridge a lot of these gaps. So we felt good about that. So the next slide. So as I mentioned, interagency coordination is really complex. And our goal to deliver government services in a seamless way it sounds easy, but it's not easy. And our publics kind of don't distinguish between us. In fact, telling this story about how complex and hard it is not a popular message to carry because they just expect us to do it. But I think everybody on this call knows how hard it is. One thing that we're finding is helping a lot is we work with a research social scientist on our team from the research station, and she and I have been really grounding ourselves in international project management standards. So we speak a more constant, consistent, transparent process the whole rest of the business world uses to manage complex projects. That's not something we typically invest in government. We're finding that this is really helping us. We're coming up with a methodology tailored just for this forestry team. It's helping us assess our risks, set our metrics, target the right information at the right level. Definitely are going to keep investing in this, and we're doing it through an organization called the Project Management Institute. So last slide. So we have a performance measures section in this business plan that we're still working on. One of the things that we are learning sooner rather than later, that it's important to have a baseline on your collaboration. You put all this investment in a team and you're working so hard and fast, but yet you don't even know, sometimes the work can be invisible. You don't know how far you've come and if you're pushing things in the right direction. So again, I want to mention that we're working with Kristen Flores, a research social scientist, who's actually working on working groups through the Forest Service, both nationally and regionally, to look at metrics when it comes to these efforts like the Joint Chiefs Project. And she's also helping us on our team set our metrics. So she's taken a baseline for us already on collaboration, which I wouldn't have known where to start on that. I give her a lot of credit for that. And in some of the applied research she's doing with us on the forestry team, she's sharing that up through the agency with these working groups that are looking at metrics for us nationally. So we feel lucky there, like maybe we won't be surprised when the upward reporting mandate comes down more formally on how do we do outcomes-based reporting. So with that, I'll close that. Those are just a few things with a lot more lessons to come. And again, thanks for inspiring us to try to be a forestry team in Ohio.
Thank you, Jerel. Wow, I just think it's really inspiring how you're being so intentional about the way you're collaborating and assessing how you're collaborating or the results anyway, they're very neat.